Welcome to part two of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. We're continuing the conversation with Dr. Lis Conde of Keypath Education Australia. Now, you've also mentioned cognitive engagement, a little bit about cognition when it comes to student learning. Now, when you're designing for cognitive engagement, what tools and tips would you suggest for academics to apply when ensuring that element of constructive alignment?
So the good thing about, active learning approaches, again, your case, your problem, your project, your demonstration, is that students actually get to do that over time, right? And it allows you for you to actually simulate a similar task for them to practice and then actually turn it in as an assessment. But when it comes to cognitive engagement, Jukes, there's a lot out there. There are three types of engagement that students can have with your unit or your content or your topic. They can be cognitively engaged, which means basically that they're learning by thinking, by processing, by encoding, by organizing, by deconstructing concepts of material. Okay, that's what cognitive engagement is. There's physical engagement where a student can log on, and it's what happens a lot with Facebook is that the students log on and they're going through and spending a lot of physical time engaged with that one page or activity. The other one is affective engagement, and that is if your student feels really highly positive emotions, they're likely to be focused on your project or your unit or your concept for a little bit longer. So with cognitive engagement, there's a lot of tools out there, and all you're doing is using technology to actually facilitate those cognitive capacity. So some of the my favorite is a mind map, for example, which is not that used often, but mind mapping tools are great for organization. But depending on what you want to do, there are things like, if you want them to recall or elaborate or plan around a concept, there's stuff like online collaborative note taking, which is often not used as well, e-magazines or e-journals. There's digital whiteboards, which allow you to draw influences and people are collaborating around a concept. Those are cognitive tools, but it doesn't even have to be that complicated. When you have a really good objective and you're focusing your technology use on that objective, again, the constructive alignment we were talking about. If you have something around, analyze the data and deduct or predict an outcome, something like Excel can become a really powerful tool, cognitive tool, So it's not that you have to make it as complicated. It's what's the goal that you're trying to achieve with your tool. And if you align that has a very likely potential to be a cognitive tool. One thing that I want to suggest, and it's something that it's not as done as often, is the use of choice as a tool in your task. So the idea is that, and there was some research done by Professor John Hattie for visual learning I think it was last year. And what he was saying is that if you actually are creating a task and you are giving students the choice to present the outcome of that task to you, whether it is through whatever means they want, they are likely choice is likely to sustain not only to sustain interest for the long term. So for longer terms, I don't know if you've actually seen an LMS statistics, but I actually live in LMS statistics and, learning analytics a lot. And the pattern that we've been able to see recently is that students, they come into week 0, week 1, and they're pumped and they're there and, there's all these hours in there and they're downloading everything. But by week 4, it's like they're there maybe sometimes and they're just working on their tasks. But interestingly, when they have the power of choice, they're likely to to be interested. They're likely to stay on your unit a little bit longer because they're likely to be more cognitively and effectively engaged to the task that you put in hand. Usually it helps them to, have this ownership of what they're creating. And creativity is a way too to really make sure that they're learning,
Yeah. I think the next bit around cognition and cognitive engagement is that element of course presentation. How do you present your course in a way that is engaging? So I think where I'm going at is, what are some cognitive principles from your research that may guide this process of presenting courses or units, as you've mentioned?
Right. Okay. There's so cognitive principles are a thing of the last paradigm, and it was cognitive theory there was a lot of focus on that during the 80s and 90s, but what the point is how do you present content in a way that the brain can process it more effectively, right? And here is where a lot of teachers, because they don't know, and they think, again, they go back into how they were taught themselves, right? And they think, okay, I was taught by my professor was talking to me, and I had all of these PowerPoints, and it was slides of like 500 words each, and I had to take notes, and that actually doesn't work. Cognitive principles give you the idea that, one, you actually take in information through your eyes and verbal information through your ears, right? What's interesting, Chooks, is that you can take in information through your ears and it stays in your brain, in your working memory for 60 seconds. And it actually has this rehearsal mechanism where you're likely to remember things that you hear more often than things that you read. And the reason for that is that your brain has the capacity of taking up to 7 elements in at once and processing only 4. Mm-hmm. Now, imagine in a slide or in a unit, in a page, if you have, you have your animation, you have sometimes your voice, you're lecturing at the same time, you have, things that are animated here and there, you have pictures and you have arrows and all that stuff. Your brain just sort of gets overloaded, can't deal with it. So the first principle is, avoid unnecessary information. Overwhelming your students with extensive amounts of content on a slide, for example, or on a page in your unit is just not going to do the deal. The best way to go about it is by going by something called a modality principle, which tells you basically, how about you, instead of using words, you just record your words on lecture and use a picture, use arrows, use, color to bring attention to the most important parts of that picture or that one concept you're presenting, but avoid too much text. The sequence also of elements is really important. Here is where some teachers actually don't know that they're preventing their students, or they're putting in obstacles in the learning experiences, and that will prevent students from actually learning. And one of them is, you get a lot of teachers, and I have one teacher specifically in my mind who likes to, and he thinks the best approach so students don't cheat is for students to not have enough time to answer their quizzes, right? Yes, it is a quiz, but you get a minute for each question. It's this really complicated question. Go, 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 go. And that actually, it's called the sequence, the sequencing principle, and the time that you're giving the students needs to be a time that is just enough for the students to be relaxed, because what stress does to the brain is that it blocks it. So my student is it's really stressed, doesn't know how to answer. Okay, I don't want to do this. They drop out. And it's really easy to avoid. Just present a challenge and a time that it's, it's reasonable. so that you can avoid that. The use of cues, the signaling principle, the use of cues and arrows to call the attention to certain things is another one that's really easy to apply. Personalize your text, personalize your voice recordings or your videos that you're doing. Don't say to the student, this student will be doing, avoid that. Say to the student, you will be doing, or you will be learning, or you will be achieving. And how about you try this, because you're actually talking to them, and students are more likely to listen if you are directing yourself to them. So these are just some tricks without going too deeply into the theory. It's just like simple tricks for teachers to actually get the best results from the content they're presenting,
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the things we struggle with is a lot of information in one page, on a lot of context for an exam, and you're only given very few minutes to process the task to actually achieve that or to complete it. So I think that's a really good point you share. We're going to move along to your area of research, which is around professional development for technology integration. So the question is, your work as a lead learning designer has been working and coaching so many academics over the years. So how do you go about advising and negotiating how to rethink and identify areas of improvement in their own designs?
Yeah, a fantastic question, and look, it's really relevant for higher education institutions. Actually, as a learning designer, let's start with my role because that was your question. As a learning designer, I don't have that much time to provide professional development for that academic. However, I can't really help them become aware of how this task or how their approach to this task has it been successful. So when I actually work with an academic and we're dealing with a topic, a concept, an article, whatever, I actually ask them, have you actually read it? Have you actually used it? How did it go last time that you taught it? How was your experience teaching this unit, this topic, this article, this video, right? How did it go before? And usually teachers go like, oh, well, yeah, these were some of the good things and these were some of the things that didn't work well. And then that's when you start the conversation of, oh, right. So if that didn't go well, what do you think that was? And how can we improve it? So that's sort of like the on the spot, really quick and, a way of actually raising that awareness. Is what you want effective, and have you used it before? And often, teachers don't have that, reflective practice as a guiding principle in their teaching. So it is really important for you to question them and advise them based on their own experience teaching the concept. So that's one way to do it really quickly. A lot of learning designers will just come and just tell the academic what to do, or the academic will tell the learning designer. But it's important, to just have that exchange and have that voice. And sometimes you're just the brainstorming board, so it's important for you to do that. But if you're in higher education institutions, and you're dealing now after the pandemic, post-COVID times, the higher education landscape has changed a lot. A lot of sessional staff have lost their jobs, and academics are struggling. Funding got cut. So you have a very different landscape in which you're likely to end up with academics who are working and teaching and doing research at the same time. So having ways of doing professional development that is effective but efficient at the same time is important. If you really want to stand out as an institution for your teaching quality. And one of the ways that I've found, and one of the most effective ways, is this peer review mechanism, right? You're very likely to do something if you know your peer from the next class is having really good results, and you think they're cool, so you want to, do something like what they're doing. And so, another way of actually doing it, and this is just more formal training, but, have the academic actually watch themselves lecture. It's going to be the most confronting experience that you can help them have. Most of them will hate it, but you need to sit down. You know, they need to have this experience where they're sitting down, they're watching themselves, and they're evaluating this, not justifying. They're evaluating how they're actually teaching, and then they can actually see, oh, okay, this is what I could be doing better. More formalized professional development, of course, outside of the scope of learning designers and what they can do. But doing definitely as a learning designer a long-term approach as well is you need to gain their trust, and so every single interaction that you have with them is really important. And another way for them to actually be willing and open to negotiate changes and see opportunities of improvement is for you to work on gaining their trust. So taking the opportunity of your first interaction with them to sort of be like, hey, who are you? How are you? You know, where do you come from? What's your background? And how have you taught before? You know, have you been an online? Have you studied online? And then, you know, from there you can start seeing, you know, asking questions like, have you had good experiences on studying online? Have you had bad experiences studying online? And if so, what were they, and how can you avoid them in your own unit or in your own practice? So not going so much into the theory, and I know that it was a long explanation, Chooks, but those are just three of some of the most common strategies that I've used.
No, I think you really touched on some really effective strategies, and I think in my recent position, I think building that relationship with that level of trust has always been essential in understanding and making that culture change in terms of how we design or even think about possibilities when it comes to improvements. So I know you've talked a little bit, I think you've already touched on this, but I just wanted to call it out there. I think we're moving into a culture of more active learning. We've moved into a space where everyone is doing everything fully online now. And I know one of the challenges is moving away from a didactic approach to learning. So how would you say you have successfully coached academics in rethinking or reimagining their learning content? We know we've got, you did mention academics having loads and loads of slides of text, but now how have you been able to coach them in rethinking these learning content and infusing elements of activities and also leading on to authentic assessments? That word you don't really like.
Yeah. Okay. Right. That's a big question. But the way that you actually do it in practice is, you know, some of the most common issues with academics is, one, they don't have the time, so they just give you like a link to an article, they give you like a link to a video, and then you know, see what you can do with that as a learning designer, you know. But usually what happens is that, you know, academics want to use entire chapters and put that entire text on the page, right? And of course, there are copyright issues with that. And there's also, looking at it from a cognitive perspective, you're likely to overwhelm students if you provide 10 pages of text in one page. You know what I mean? Like, hopefully you'll stay away from that. So the way that you actually work with them is, you know, you sit down and I'll give you a specific example. A while back, I was working with a teacher or an academic at the University of Melbourne, and one of the things, he was teaching statistics, and one of the things that he was complaining about was about how he had so many international students who didn't speak English well, and they wouldn't really participate. And that was a huge issue for him because he wanted students to participate. So we were thinking about it, and I was like, all right, let's just see what we can do. And once you got into the unit and you started seeing it, You had immense amount of content. You had summative questions of what is the right answer to this statistical approach? What is the specific outcome of this? Just stuff that students definitely had to think about. Some of them were problems. But there wasn't anything that gave the student the idea to think about it first and then actually approach. So connect it to my life and then actually approach the topic. So one of the questions that so I went through my natural and normal routine, which is, all right, tell me, how has this, have you had any, what has been effective in your unit? What has been ineffective in your unit? What could be improved? And then, and he didn't see any improvement areas, even though he said that it was the students' fault that, they couldn't speak English, so they wouldn't participate. So I started asking, normal questions. How did you do this type of statistics in the industry when you were doing them? And he would tell me about all of the tasks that he would do in his daily life as a statistician. And, and from there I was like, well, here is actually a really nice case that we could use for a case study, and that can be a problem that they can then visualize, and then they can predict and analyze the information from this one case. So, we started talking to that. And one of the suggestions that I had was, well, how about you actually flip your classroom? You actually give the students, rather than putting everything on your page, you send a link out to your students that they read the content, and then they come in and discuss it in the classroom. And this way, even if they don't know English that much, at least they have a chance to think about it. His response was, no, I don't like the flipped classroom. I can't do that. and I was like, all right. Why do you think that? He's like, well, because, I think that's mumbo jumbo, and, I don't do that. So what had to happen was a situation where we actually had to discuss how he actually was teaching, which was actually, he was already flipping the classroom. The thing is that as we were watching, we had to watch a lecture together for like 10 minutes. And what he was doing is that he was speaking so fast that the students didn't have the chance to actually respond. Like, he would ask a question and then he would jump straight to continue to lecture rather than giving students the chance to think about it. So he saw that and he's like, oh, okay, so I have to slow down. Yes, you have to slow down, but how about you continue flipping the classroom? And in the end, and because I was willing to actually do all this work and spend all this time with him, what ended up happening is that he ended up taking out all of the content from the page, sending it out to the students so they can read it before class. The class would start, and he was using a poll to get students to start thinking about a really abstract question. And then the whole class was used for students to think about 3 main questions. Every class, he had 3 main questions that he wanted students to work on, or problems that he wanted the students to resolve. And so the class was no longer a didactical class. It was just something where the students can do that, can discuss together. And a lot of people think that can't be done online, Chooks. But again, talking about all these cognitive tools, there's a lot of things that you can do today that don't require discussion boards. And so if you think about it, discussion outside of a discussion board, you can come in and use collaborative software to create mind maps, online collaborative note-taking. You can have students now you don't even have to be that complicated. You can use Office, all of the apps of Office 365, and you already have collaborative note taking, collaborative analysis of data through Excel. You have, collaborative surveys where students can actually see each other's responses and then think about them and discuss them. You have things like Sway and things where they can actually chat with each other. So you don't need fancy tools. All you need is a clear objective of what you want so that your students can actually use the class time to use the tools and actually engage in talking about the content and manipulating the content you're providing. I think I've spoken a lot. I'm sorry about that.
Now that's totally fine. I do want to appreciate the fact that you use examples, and I think that's the core of what we're doing with Integrity Matters. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you so much for sharing. I think in a summary of what you just said in the last end is just thinking about pedagogy before technology. Once you know what the objective is, then you can actually work out what the technology is that will support technology. So thank you again, Lis, and I hope everyone had a really good listen and understood all the amazing wealth of knowledge you've shared today. And yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation on Integrity Matters by Turnitin.
Thank you so much.